Sexual abuse happens to all genders and in all cultures. It's not about a specific group of people, it's everywhere and it's a complex problem. In this program, we are talking about male survivors of sexual abuse. Greetings, everyone. This is the Skyrise Media Society Guftagoo program. Today, we are going to talk about a very hardcore concept, such as sexual abuse. And in our cities, especially in Vancouver City, we are going to talk about sexual abuse not only as for females, but also for male. I know that there is no concept of gender when we talk about sexual abuse, and we don't want to kind of gender base that. However, male survivors of sexual abuse, they are suffering extreme hardships and psychological traumas. And this program is about raising awareness and talking about the challenges, the civic issues they are dealing with. Civic issues are the struggles for finding services, mental health services, housing, employment, etc. So today I'm going to talk with my guests who are specialists in this area, and we are going to explore this. And please don't forget to give us your feedback and email us at skyrisemediasociety@gmail.com. So today I have two guests, and thank you very much for your time, for being here. Mason, I know that you are Executive Director for BC Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse, and Sherry is the Victim Service Coordinator. And your services are so much needed, and you are doing an excellent job, I know, in Vancouver. However, I want you to, Mason, start talking about what are you seeing, what are you experiencing the challenges of male survivors be, especially in Vancouver area.
Well, I mean, that's a big question, but you run into similar issues with a lot of different people. What we're running into is honestly more of I would say, an openness for a lot of these guys to talk about it, and kind of more of a recognition that there is a gap in these resources. Um, in terms of what we're running into, assuming that implies like stressful implications for us as an agency or a team, there is kind of a trying to figure out how to triangulate resources, how to make sure we know that there are things that these people can rely on. We can offer what we can, but there's also a sense of there are limits to what we can do being a smaller group. So some of that kicks in, the sense of we don't quite have anywhere to send them a lot of times. We just did our monthly case consultation today, and it was mostly about clients that really needed resources. And even though we can offer therapy and group therapy and stuff, there's still a kind of this gap there. So I think that's where most of our frustration might fall in terms of what you're asking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It is frustrating. And with the talk with many healthcare workers, I know that there is a gap, as you mentioned. And usually the implication of it is, I mean, people do not get help that they need. What do you see, Sherry, in terms of victim support? What do you see is happening?
Um, in terms of not asking for help, there are different reasons for clients that disclose this. It's harder for male survivors, I'd say, to disclose this issue. But in terms of resources, as you mentioned and Mason mentioned, we struggle usually to find resources that are specifically working for male survivors. Clients get overwhelmed when they're dealing with a lot of paperwork and navigating through justice system or doing police report or doing different applications. So this is what we mainly deal with. But as you guys mentioned, resources are not that enough. And it's hard for us to find a proper one when we're dealing with clients that are basically asking they need specific resources, I'd say.
What is the one resource that is hard to find, Mason?
What is the one resource that's hard to find?
What is
Um,
one of the examples that you have? What is that?
it's a difficult question because there's a few that come up. I would say a streamlined way of moving people away from wanting to reach out to us when they probably need like a mental health team and like there's kind of psychosis and stuff kicking in. We struggle to kind of figure out how to support those people because we don't want to invalidate their own trauma narratives and experience, but we also like we can't really offer what they're looking for a lot of the times. So that would be one of it. But the other thing is like I talk with people about how there's obviously a gender gap in the way resources are allocated. I think most men have it easier in general, but in the specific industry or the specific field that we're talking about, men do, I think, have limited resources in both domestic violence support, legal support around that, as well as sexual violence support. So there is a sense of like those types of clients, we're trying to figure out like exactly what we can do. And some of it is talk therapy, some of it is that, some of it's our victim service team kind of trying to offer supports and stuff like that. But there still is that's what I would say is the biggest issue is like a lot of these guys like they kind of fall through the cracks, and some of them need parameters around these things that we just can't really offer being a small team. So that shines through as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like there is a lot of, I mean, I have heard this before, stigma attached to male survivors. I mean, men are supposed to take care of themselves and do this and that and never complain, I guess. And
It's it's an
usually
it's an evolving stigma. It's
evolving.
it's changed even since I started, which was 7 or 8 years ago. It has changed. So it is evolving, but we're still trying to figure out where the resources are. Because I think culturally the conversation is evolving, but resource allocation has not caught up to that, which makes sense. It's got to go through bureaucracy and all that stuff. Um, but that's the issue we're kind of running into is people being able to kind of validate themselves and understand the cultural stigma around it without being able to secure resource allocation. And that's it's a limitation of our agency. It's just very tough to figure out how to help people manage that, I think.
And in terms of resources, I know housing is a big issue, and people who fall into that crack of not being able to work and not being able to pay their rent, what's happening to them? So, what do you see, Sherry, in terms of housing issues for men?
Yeah, I was going to mention one of the resources that is so hard to find is for fathers that are dealing with that are basically dealing with intimate partner violence, and they're with kids. So transition house for male survivors that are dealing in that with that situation is hard because we know there are a lot of shelters, transition houses for female survivors, but we haven't been able to find one for male survivors when there's a kid involved. And as you mentioned, BC Housing, the wait list is super long, and they're trying their best. We understand, but this has been an issue for everyone dealing with all the paperwork. As I mentioned, clients are overwhelmed already, whether it's recent sexual assault or intimate part of violence, or if they disclose this incident after so many years, they're overwhelmed. They can't deal with all this paperwork, and as victim services and frontline worker, we have limited capacity, so it gets tough sometimes.
Absolutely. And in terms of resources, not only the resources are lacking, I mean, in terms of stigma, as you mentioned, Mason, is the evolving. So I'm thinking about all those people who have hard time to come forward to even seek help. Uh, Nevertheless, being kind of involved in a lot of challenges such as housing, employment, etc. So this is really in terms of in Canada. I mean, I assume we think that people we are doing much better. I mean, or other people think that we are doing much better, right? In Canada, in terms of resources, etc. However, for men, sounds like resources are really lacking. So let's talk about the sexual abuse as an issue, as a societal problem. What is the problem? If we want to explore that.
That's a very broad question. I think
I
there,
know.
I think there are a lot of a lot of implications. Like when we talk about the resource lack of allocation, the way society is kind of struggling to meet these people where they're at. I think sometimes the conversations can get siphoned into this sense of like that's where we should focus because honestly that is where it's going to make the biggest difference. But I sometimes feel people don't talk enough about the outcomes of these things not being remedied essentially. So a sense of like there are outcomes, there are difficult things people are going through because of these lack of resources and stuff. Um, but yeah, when you ask about the impact of like male survivors generally, I'm like, well, that's a there's a lot. There's a there's a hell of a window there, and I'm not quite sure where we want to go with that.
The reason I'm putting that broad as possible is because think about our viewers. We don't know how people are aware of, especially male survivors, right? And this is a very hidden issue or hidden problem and hidden challenge for many communities. I'm thinking about the newcomer immigrant communities who might have challenges with sexual abuse issues and back home, or they have gone through this trauma of sexual abuse. However, they don't know that there is such a thing at all that they can talk about, right? So that's why we need to kind of think about this broad aspect of whom we want to reach out. I mean, yes, resources are lacking, but the sexual abuse in general is a problem affecting our societies, right? People not being able to know, or not being able. I mean, they kind of the stigma attached to it, not talking about it. So that's a first hand problem that we have. So that's why we need to kind of be look at this a little bit broader as possible, beyond the boxes. I think. So, what do you think, Sherry?
Um, I would say advocacy, because and awareness. Um, there, as we were talking about gender based violence, we were saying that okay, there are a lot of resources for female survivors, and generally victims of crime. So there has been advocacy for them. That needs to happen for male survivors as well. And then I think whoever is working in this sector needs to be more proactive and in finding resources and doing more collaboration, connecting with different resources. The part that you mentioned about stigma and newcomers and what is cultural in this specific topic and this sensitive topic, we all know that, and it's so hard for clients. And it's especially in our culture, it's talking about sexual abuse is something very hush hush, and people don't talk about it, people don't mention it. Um, and then having this environment, non-judgmental environment for clients to be able to just come forward when they reach out to one resource, the rest knows okay, they're available resources, and they have, I can make an example, they have Farsi speaker or things that clients can be comfortable. Again, I can give you an example. I was working with a client. They were sorry, they were dealing with domestic violence in when they just got here in Canada. So everything was overwhelming. They had no idea about the system, how things work, and then they were given a lot of guidelines and handbook and paperwork that English was barrier, they couldn't go through it. And then after all these years, they're ready to reach out for and ask for help, but we have passed so many deadlines because they were not able to read what's going on, what's are available for them, what are the resources. So in cases like that, I'd say if there are resources that can be more proactive, people that can be more proactive finding resources for clients, what can make it easier for them to come forward, disclose, and what they need, I think will be helpful for everyone, especially for Iranian people, for our culture that we all know. What are the stigmas, as I said, about sexual abuse, specifically for male survivors? So I'd say, yeah, advocacy is number one. And as people that are working in this sector, being more proactive to find resources.
Mhm. So, Mason, in terms of being the executive director, are you kind of being invited to places, organization to talk about this? I want to see what is the interest out there for knowing about this, your
Yeah,
agency, and also the problem.
the education. So I started a while back. I won't go into all the weeds of it, but since I've been involved, the education interest has skyrocketed. Like it's we have people from all over Europe attending workshops and stuff like that. COVID and the idea of things being able to be remote partly influenced that, but I also think it was just the timing of like when society seemed more ready to talk about this stuff. Um, and I totally get and agree with what Sherry is saying, which is like there is this sense of like men are locked into kind of this assumption, and that is both an intriguing and a devastating thing because the more we talk with them, the more they get kind of a sense of normalization around it. And we might be some of the only places that they go to where they can achieve that type of normalizing because it's so dark and so close to home for them. So we're trying to do our best like with that, and right now we're just trying to build out a resource list, make sure we have everything available for whoever needs it because there are limits. We can't deal with housing or legal issues and stuff. So, but we are working on all of that type of stuff, and it is a sense of it's at the end of the day, I want to normalize that it's just a tough thing. Like I talk about with people that rape and abuse for women is somewhat normalized. It's somewhat that's what the Me Too movement was able to do, and there was a catching on to it. And I was doing my training during that, and I'm like, being raped as a man is not congruent with masculinity. So a lot of these guys, that is where they get hung up, and it is a specific type of learning that you get by working with these guys to kind of figure out how to talk about that. And I don't think bureaucracy or society funds that enough. I think we need a little bit more of that. But we're trying our best to try to meet those guys where they're at and
Mhm.
manage it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely important to not only advocate, as Sherry says, and also kind of educate the service providers, healthcare workers, etc. About this resource. I mean, integrated care is about knowing what is out there. And at times I'm wondering, I mean, if each one of us, we are in separate islands and working separately, what can be done about it? I mean, of course, it's evolving again. This is an evolving process. So, in terms of education that Mason was talking about, Sherry, what do you see the needs? I mean, in terms of for example, new immigrants community. I mean, just in general, the need of knowing that yes, such a problem exists, and they can talk about it. What do you say that about it?
Um, it's tough to say because so many things have started back home, and it's already in everyone's, I'd say, whole idea and perspective. So changing that will be a bit hard, but I think the environment allows us to just figure new things and be more comfortable to talk about these challenges. As someone that dealt with so many things back home and then getting here and feeling more comfortable, feeling heard and seen, I personally started to share things that I was not able to share before. So I'd say so many things are for both genders. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female victim. It just there's same feelings like shame, guilt, things that you can't really articulate. But when you feel in a safe environment, a non-judgmental environment, then you can come forward and disclose what happened or things that you have in mind. So educating ourselves to be non-judgmental and be there, just a good listener. I think it's very important thing. It's not easy for people to hear dark stories or traumatic event. Understandable, not everyone needs to do that, but if we know a friend or family member that are here, new here, and they're trying to learn, maybe just throw it out there and say like, these are the resources that are available. It doesn't mean that, oh, you've been there or you have this trauma, but
Mhm.
it's good for them to know what is available, just have it in their mind. Maybe one day they feel comfortable and they're ready to come forward. So yeah, I think that's it. Just being available for each other is a good thing.
Which is a beautiful thing. I know that Mason, I mean, we all we know about the indigenous communities and the trauma of sexual abuse they have gone through over the, I know how many, I don't know how many centuries, whatever, especially the residential home survivors. And how how do you see these indigenous communities accessing your uh, agency services? I mean, I don't want to divide people in between non-indigenous, indigenous. However, indigenous people, they have this specific cultural trauma and also sexual abuse trauma that they are working at. So,
I think it's a poignant and smart question. I don't quite understand how I'm going to make an answer, but I'm going to try my best. But there, like I've worked with indigenous communities in the Yukon and northern BC and stuff, and it's mostly to do with the trickle down of residential historical abuse, um, which is very tough because you're not. I think a lot of us in Vancouver and BC and Alberta and all these and Toronto and stuff, the other places I talk with people there, they have all these other communities to kind of deal with. But when I work with these communities, there is nowhere to go. So you're kind of stuck feeling trapped the same way clients might be. Um, in terms of their limitations to access resources and like why they might not be reaching out, I genuinely think that's a rational response to the practical limitations of what they can reach out for. They can reach out to us. That we have some therapists, but it's like at the end of the day, they're not reaching out to it, and it's made me reticent and a bit hesitant when I'm doing these workshops because I can't overpromise them because I can become comfortable with them and talk with them about different things, and then I don't want to say, hey, if you reach out, you're guaranteed this immediately, like that type of thing. We just don't have the funding or financing for that. That said, I think um, not just indigenous communities, I also think Buddhist communities, I think there's lots of communities that have figured out smarter ways of mental health than traditionally white North American communities. So I feel like it's a privilege just to learn from them. But then I'm stuck in this position of like, damn it, I can't really offer exactly what you need and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a gap there. Um, but yeah, we're open to any suggestion. I'm working with all those groups already and just trying to figure out like where that might lie. I get that, but it's a difficult thing, especially when it's a very small percentage of our clients that are
mhm,
indigenous. So it's a bit of
mhm,
like maybe it's because we're not promoting enough, which is kind of my hesitation with it. But it's also like, well, we can't base it on this. So yeah, there's a lot more, there's a lot more weeds of nuance, like when you're just kind of trying to figure it out. And I'm not that way personally. I'm just trying to make sure it works. So, but I definitely respect the question,
Mhm.
because I've learned more in terms of emotional value from those communities than I think I've learned from most textbooks I've read. So it's a
Yeah.
weird kind of disengaging aspect of it. So I appreciate the question there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need to be inclusive in terms of talking about this huge trauma. I mean, there are so many different groups. I mean, although we know that sexual abuse doesn't know any gender, doesn't know any social class, doesn't know any ethnicity. I mean, it happens everywhere, unfortunately. And however, for the survivors to know that there are some services available, although Mason, you say that it is, I mean, we cannot provide it all. However, as Shirley said, maybe we can just listen to them and see what else we can do. I mean, in terms of connecting to society and communities out there and services out there. So this is the best hope we can have. So in terms of psychosomatic issues, I mean, in terms of symptoms, what are people sharing with you once they come for intake, for example, Sherry? What are they usually, the complaints is, beside the fact that they have been sexually abused? What are they talking about?
Um, I would say a high percentage of our clients are dealing with depression and anxiety and PTSD. Um, some of them are self-diagnosed. Some of them have official diagnosis. Um, in terms of suicide ideation and attempts, again, it's when you talk to them, you just see a lot of passive thoughts or attempts in the past. So these are things that we mainly go over our intake with our clients. Not having a good or a wide network of, I mean, let's say emotional support is another thing that mainly we see in our clients. This is not a topic that they can talk with everyone about it. So they feel isolated most of the time, specifically when they're talking about this topic. Yeah, these are things that I can mention.
Hmm. So yeah, what are you seeing, Mason? I mean, Sherry talking about the depression, anxiety clients are sharing. What else is coming up usually?
What I see is a, like, almost a frustration with, um, this, like, and I'm trying to filter it through, like, particularly the type of clients we work with, which is there's a sense of an origin to their current struggles or their current echoes and their current things they're dealing with. So there's a lot of, like, I find people in my field and our field are just not, they're not quite working on how you connect those current struggles with what people have gone through. Um, and I don't know, I don't necessarily know if that's like a gendered thing. I don't think that's like a male survivors thing. I think that's just more of a trauma survivors thing. And I think, like, what I'm realizing with our clientele is that that's where the issues come up. Is like, are we working on something? Are we doing something? Can I get something out of it? I think it's a bit of a difference between being able to look back and figure out what happened to you, and also figuring out how that impacted you. And then are you willing to change the way it impacted you? Like, I think that that kind of feels like where I think people can struggle with, and that's what we notice the most. Otherwise, it would just be a noticing of clients that are, they're hallucinating or they're dissociating, or they're just not really tethered to reality. That can also be very difficult for us as a team because it's very tough to, you don't want to let them down or make them feel like alienated, but you can also understand, like, they need that type of support. but what they're saying just doesn't line up with reality. So those are the types of things that I think we're struggling with. In terms of what most of the men are dealing with, because I'm so used to these questions being about like where are the problem areas, which I don't want to dive into necessarily. It is guys that are feeling vulnerable, feeling lonely, feeling sad, and they're not used to how to deal with that. They're not comfortable with a different framing of what masculinity can look like. They don't quite know how to grab onto that without feeling shame. There's a sense that I was gonna say earlier, like, or maybe I did say it, but like the idea that being like raped or abused as a woman in a lot of these cultural things is okay, and for these guys, it's completely incongruent with what they were raised with thinking masculinity was.
Yeah.
And I feel that from my own cultural background, but I also see that more strongly with other cultural backgrounds. And I think
Mhm.
that's where a lot of the kind of churning the work really is trying to figure out how to communicate with those guys about like what is masculinity, why are you feeling
Yeah.
this, but yeah,
Yeah.
then I think we deal with a lot of plenty of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading a paper a long time ago about the psychosomatic aspect of sexual abuse that usually men especially they are in pain of his they have chronic pains and they don't know what this is about. So usually, I mean, men also have harder time according to those the papers I'm reading, harder time in terms of even going for physical health checkup. So this comes up often with family doctors that I have pain here, I have pain there. However, sexual abuse is not an issue that usually is detected in relationship to the chronic pain, whereas the psychosomatic pain of sexual abuse is obviously physical challenges that we are seeing clients have. So I know this is a tough general concept, and but usually the pain that we see, both physical and emotional and mental, I mean, is overwhelming. I think for you as frontline workers dealing with people, I mean, both Mason and you, Sherry. So, how do you deal with it though once you see people in pain and psychosis and the challenges? I mean, what happens to you? I want to shift
Sure,
the
sure,
topic
you take it.
toward.
Take it, sure. Because I
Uh,
don't, I'm not just stuck with the front line. I also get to the long term. Sher-
mhm.
Mhm.
Sherry's the front line, and it's a different kind of words. I want her to be able to advocate on that.
No, it's just well, we just ask Mason for help all the time when we're dealing with tough clients. At the end, he's the one who has to just deal with all the tough clients and all the emails that we receive that clients are just kind of lashing out. But
Mhm.
I'm grateful, honestly, for where I'm working. We just debrief after intakes if stories are brutal, but sometimes it's like super overwhelming to hear. So we have Mason available most of the time to just we debrief after our intake. With clients. Our agency has monthly consults, so again, we have a chance to just sit with the team and go over what has been challenging and then how the month was looking for us. So that, and I'm mentioning that because I've been in different network meetings with frontline workers that they really struggle and they don't have this kind of support with their team. So I'm very grateful for what I have with the team and the support that I'm getting from Mason. But yeah, what we do, it's again tough. We had a meeting today, our monthly consults, that we were just talking about how we bring it up with clients that are dealing with addiction and want to start working on this traumatic event, and then they're dealing with housing, and we are obviously seeing some clear symptoms of delusion. And then it's going to be a tough conversation for us to have with the client to say, hey, go figure your meds and other stuff out and then come to us. That can be an easy conversation with clients. And it puts us in a very tough situation that we have to deal with sometimes. So
Mm.
that's my part.
Yeah. How about you, Mason? How do you take care of yourself? What Mason you go through?
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, first of all, I will cringe a little bit about Sherry acknowledging the type of support that I try to offer, but I also do understand kind of where it's coming from. My goal, kind of inheriting this place, was always to be. I want to make sure it's as productive as it can be. Um, and a lot of the stuff you're asking about, which we're now detouring to like what it's like for us to handle it. For me to handle it, it is incredibly difficult because there's a very small pocket of the population we deal with that is causing me and multiple people far more work than I think most people would kind of assume. But you got to kind of figure out how to work with those people and figure that out. So it ends up being this thing of like you kind of bond through that and you learn through it. That said, I think working with male survivors is the most privileged and wisdom inducing thing that I ever could have done. And I never planned to do this. This was not my agenda. But I'm like, I have learned so much by working with these guys, and I respect them so much. And they allow me to feel a sense of like, maybe I'm bad. Like, I got to figure this out. Like, it's such a good population to work with if you can handle it, that I'm endeared to it and I love it. And I do think it's one of the most privileged things ever. And I think that's part of what Sherry's talking about is like we're trying to figure out like, okay, I want to make sure everyone's safe and good and the agency is good. So that's yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with it. Is just a sense of we're doing what we can, we're trying our best, and we're totally open to any sort of feedback or insights. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sitting with two hats here. I mean, I have myself worked with male survivors since 2004, although I'm not seeing many clients right now for you guys. But I mean, as a therapist, I'm kind of always aware of this problem. So now, as a host of this TV program, I felt like the least we can do is to raise awareness, honestly. And I really appreciate this conversation. So, to end the program or end this interview or the talk, this informal talk, I didn't have any questions written or anything like that because I feel like it's important to have a debate on what can we do. And I really invite other co-workers out there, healthcare workers, people who are interested to raise awareness about this topic to come forward, and we always want to talk about this. I mean, I think there is no end to how we can talk about male survivors of sexual abuse, and I absolutely agree with you, Mason, that this is a really enhancing knowledge as once you listen to people who have gone through this trauma, they are the experts. We are just facilitating, and you guys are there to just kind of offer them a safe space. So let's have a last talk, and then we wrap up the program. What best can we do? How can we end this? Listen, or Sherry, go ahead.
You want to start with me? You want to start with me? That's no.
Go ahead.
Um, I think I would, anytime I have a chance to be able to talk with people about what they're working on, I think we all come at it with our own kind of trauma, our own background. What I would suggest is an openness to start to think about, how do I actually interact with how these emotions are coming up? And is there a usefulness in how I'm reacting to my anxiety, my anger, anything like that? I think if anyone can start to grapple with that, they're going to likely be better off than most people. And it doesn't really matter what your origin story is. So, I mean, in this work specifically, feel free to reach out. Feel free to lean on us, come to us, talk with us. But if you're just kind of hearing this in whatever form, and you have a sense of like going through something, take a step back, and how do you react to that? How do you interface with it? That's the game. That's where mental health, I think, can be powerful. So
Absolutely. How about you, Sherry?
Mm, I focus again on education and advocacy. As you mentioned, if we know someone that's new to this society and culture, we just let them know that there are things available, resources available, things that happen was not normal, although it was normalized, but was not normal. So there's a place that we can talk about it. So again, yeah, advocacy and awareness, and then being there for clients, I think, or for whoever we know that might deal with something like that. I got a call from victim services, RCMP victim services, that they specifically called and asked for me because the client was asking for a Farsi speaker person. So things like that can help and can give clients a little bit more comfort in what they want to share. And then if they're already overwhelmed with what's happening to them, and then having this sense of, oh, I have to think in Farsi and then speak in English and then translate all the time in my mind, that can be something very challenging sometimes when emotional things are happening. And when it happens to me too, when I'm too emotional, it's hard for me to speak English. I prefer to just rant in Farsi. So I'd say, yeah, again, education, awareness, and then, yeah, be there for clients.
No, but I really appreciate the two of you taking the time. I know that it's challenging. I mean, doing all this job all day long, and even talking about it at times can be hard. So I really appreciate your time and efforts for doing this. And I asked too many questions, maybe whatever. I hope that we managed to. I know that the answers are clear, and just reach out. Anyone seeing us, if you have gone through this, know that at least the least we can do is to kind of listen. People can listen to you and see what else, what is the best course of action. So thank you very much for coming, and hope we continue this talk another time. And whenever you have something new to update, please let us know. Okay. So for our viewers, reach out to Skyrise Media Society at gmail.com with any feedback, any questions. And if you want to know about these guys, where they are, check into BC Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse. This is a great resource in Vancouver, and male survivors of sexual abuse, they have the right to receive best services and integrated health care, in my view. So hopefully we can offer it. And if you are a healthcare worker out there and you want to know more about this, again, don't be shy. Reach out to us. Reach out to Mason and Sherry and the good agency that is out there. So thanks everyone, and until next time.